you're watching Initiative Africa. My name is Asha Sampath. Welcome to your weekly magazine featuring Africa on the move through smart innovations and initiatives that work. Today we are following the efforts of African civil society to divert children from working in mines. And with our guest, we are examining the situation in Mali. Well, it's time for Initiative Africa. Let's get on with the show with our top stories today. We're heading for Mali to meet a renowned economist, Modibo Makalou, who is a former emissary of the African Union and the NEPAD Commission and former economic and financial affairs advisor to the president of Mali. From Bamako, Modibo Makalou shares his expertise on national current affairs 3 years after the coup. He's our guest today.
If you take the case of Mali, for example, 60% of national production, gross domestic product, national wealth depends on international trade. That is goods and services that we buy from abroad and goods and services that we sell abroad.
They are very young, mostly children, and are already helping their parents in artisanal gold mines in Guinea, a situation fueled by the lack of regulations in many fields of the African extractive sector.
We've noticed that in mining areas, parents neglect their children's education. They take the children with them to the mines to exploit them somehow.
Widows refuse to be bullied and expropriated. Some women in Pointe Noire are determined to fight back against the prejudice they've encountered after the death of their husbands.
I'm not fooled. I'm both legally and traditionally married. And where were they when I supported my sick husband for 7 years?
I'd like to open this edition with an exceptional document. In Guinea, the gold rush has led a precarious population to try their hand at gold panning. The country is Africa's 5th largest gold producer, with mines that feed the national and global economy. However, shadows lurk behind this gold fever, and children's voices remain silent. Children who sacrifice their classrooms for picks and shovels. Some local NGOs are fighting to change this. Sayon Koroma reports from the Sigiri region in northeast Guinea.
On the outskirts of this gold mine, a surreal scene. A little boy, barely 4 years old, is digging alongside the adults. But how can you be so strong?
You have to go home.
The old man, as he is nicknamed, has never been to school. He works alongside his mother all day long, hoping to find gold to improve their living conditions. Unfortunately, after a whole day's work, they haven't extracted more than a decigram of gold. If you sell this decigram, how much do you get? 1 decigram gives us 4 euros. After dark, with a torchlight, the old man and his mother sell their meager gold harvest to buy food. The sad reality is not unique. In the mining regions of Sigiri in the northeastern Guinea, many children are living the same reality. According to the UN, 68% of children in Guinea work from the age of 7. Many drop out of school to work in the mines, exposed to conditions threatening their health and safety. Their fragile hands handle heavy tools, and their dreams for the future fade into the dust of the mines. Yet, some children like Sira still aspire to education. I really want to go to school because this mine is very ephemeral. As we delved into the reality of the mines, we spoke to this artisanal mining manager. Here, despite the determination to combat the exploitation of children, the challenges remain complex. The complexity of the situation and the precariousness of the families hamper the implementation of effective measures.
A lot of children come to the mines. Banning children could cause problems. Those who run the small-scale mines don't want to see young children working like that, but we have no choice.
Child exploitation is a dilemma for some families. For this lady, unfortunately, education has still not led to a better life for her older children. some of them have completed their schooling and are now unemployed, which has led her family to rely on the mines and the frail shoulders of their offspring to survive. We live off the mines. If we prevent our children from working in the mines and they can't find jobs after school, what's the point of studying? Despite the grim reality of the mines, a glimmer of hope emanates from a non-governmental organization determined to bring about significant change. We've noticed that in mining areas, parents neglect their children's education. They take the children with them to the mines to exploit them somehow. So during school periods, the children must go either to school or training centers to prepare for their future. That's why we're here today. That day, we followed the team as it traveled to neighboring villages to raise awareness amongst parents of the importance of education. Have pity on these children, start sending them to school or let them have a proper job. Gold is not eternal because when you will be worn out from this job, they can take care of you. We're here to pass on this message to you. According to the NGO Humanium, which fights for children's rights, only half of Guinean children have access to secondary education, while 73% are engaged in work even before reaching the legal age of majority, and girls make up the overwhelming majority of these cases. These statistics underline the need for concerted action to change the trajectory of these young lives and offer them more promising prospects.
Modibo Makalou, our guest from Mali, is a great connoisseur of the economic systems of the sub-region and their interaction with international finance. Trained in economics and business finance in Canada and the United States between 2004 and 2017, he was responsible for designing and evaluating development policies and strategies at the Office of the President of the Republic of Mali. How does he assess the situation in his country today, 3 years after the coup? He agreed to answer to some questions from our special correspondent in Bamako, Sayon Koroma.
Modibo Makalou, hello and welcome on Initiative Africa. How would you describe the current economic situation in Mali, some 3 years after the coup?
Thank you very much for your question, Mr. Koroma. The situation in Mali is delicate, as is the entire group to which we belong. We are 8 countries which share a single currency, the French CFA.
Nous sommes 8 pays qui avons en partage une monnaie unique, le franc CFA.
In the Economic and Monetary Integration Organization, the West African Economic and Monetary Union. And you know that since the COVID pandemic, which significantly affected world trade, slowing down international trade, as well as disrupting value chains, and you know that our countries are large exporters of raw materials on the international market. And we also buy a lot on the international market. If you take the case of Mali, for example, 60% of national production, gross domestic product, national wealth, depends on international trade. That is, goods and services that we buy from abroad and goods and services that we sell abroad. If you combine the effect of the pandemic and, since February 2022, the war in Ukraine, which has increased the price of oil, an increase, by the way, that affects the price of all other goods, including shipping and insurance. And what it all means to a country like Mali is that since independence, we have always imported more than we export. And so we have a negative trade balance. We are dependent on the outside world. Obviously, this has a big impact, and our biggest imports are hydrocarbons. And you know, the dollar has also gone up in value against the French CFA. So there is an increase in the cost of hydrocarbons, which make up 30% of our imports. And hydrocarbons are used in the production of all our local goods and services. So it affects us a lot.
And global inflation also has other negative consequences.
With prices going up and food prices going up, global inflation is a scourge that every country is trying to deal with right now. And this has led to more difficulties because central banks around the world have tried to fight inflation by increasing interest rates. And when you increase interest rates, credit becomes more expensive. And when you make credit more expensive, people can no longer borrow, they can no longer consume, and that impacts the overall economy. This is the case in Mali, it's the case in Africa, and it's the case throughout the world. So we are having problems now. There is a slowdown in the economy, which resulted just last week in a collective budget, a finance law amending the budget to consider what's happened in terms of economic growth, the slowdown in the economic growth of our country.
What about security?
You know, security is a hazy subject. It's a long-term fight. It's a very long-term fight. We have a vast country, the second largest country in West Africa after Niger. The fall of Muammar Gaddafi following the intervention of NATO in 2011 greatly affected Mali. Because you saw the armed groups who are in the north of our country who rebelled against the Malian authorities. And this was already mixed in with groups that were supposedly linked to religion. I don't like the term Islamist because it has nothing to do with Islam. But anyway, they had objectives. And these two groups came together. And what happened? Well, I think the international community, starting with the Economic Community of West African States, then the African Union and the United Nations were slow to help Mali contain this crisis. At the time, it was believed to be an internal problem. The United Nations sent a peacekeeping and stabilization mission, when the real problem was the fight against the armed terrorist groups. It was terrorism. And you see today that it has spread. It has extended towards Burkina, Niger, and is heading towards the Gulf of Guinea. As the saying goes, prevention is better than the cure, meaning if firm decisions had been taken to continue the fight against these armed terrorist groups, obviously the legitimate government would not have been toppled. It would not have been overthrown in Mali back in 2012. Mali has been experiencing this crisis for 10 years, and it's multidimensional. It's now an economic, social, and humanitarian crisis. Because, as you know, we have many displaced people, both internally and externally. All this negatively affects our economy because there is no development without security, and no security without development. As you know, this insecurity is especially felt in rural areas, and 60% of the Malian population live in rural areas. And it's these rural areas that feed the urban areas. So if people are unable to go into the fields, if people are unable to fish, it will further increase the cost of living, the cost of foodstuffs, and the whole structure of our economy is such that 40% of our national wealth, of our GDP, is based on agriculture with a capital A, and rural development, of course. 20% of GDP comes from industries and 40% from services. But it is agriculture and rural development which is at the very heart of our economy. Because, as you might know, Mali is a large producer of cotton. We are the second largest producer of cereals in West Africa after Nigeria, and the fourth largest producer of rice in the whole of Africa. But unfortunately, with this insecurity, it has disrupted all national production.
Toute la production nationale.
Welcome to the second part of our show. In many African countries, becoming a widow is often the beginning of a terrible emotional and financial decline. Humiliating rituals, bullying by in-laws, or even expropriation. The lives of many widows resemble punishment. The victims' ignorance of their rights and fatalistic attitude exacerbates the situation. But in Pointe-Noire, a group of women has begun a slow process of reflection to change mindsets. Take a look.
Becoming a widow in the Congo is often the beginning of unimaginable injustice, including the loss of all basic rights. The widow is usually thrown out of the marital home, her property confiscated, and even deprived of her deceased husband's pension. Clémence and Goma learned this the hard way.
They deprived me of my husband's pension. They make fun of me, saying that I can no longer benefit because of the complicated procedures. I'm not fooled. I'm both legally and traditionally married. And where were they when I supported my sick husband for 7 years?
In the Congo, civil marriage must be preceded by traditional or customary marriage. Traditional marriage is based on dowry, but although the dowry is capped at $100 by law, customary marriage has become increasingly expensive. For the proposal ceremony, the suitor can spend up to $10,000 on numerous gifts, plus an envelope for the in-laws and the reception for the guests. Many young people fear this ceremony before civil marriage and settle into an open-ended cohabitation. How can someone live with someone else's daughter for 15 or even 20 years without taking her to the city hall? Or we remove the obligation to dowry and we go to the city hall and make the dowry, so as the family code says, one of the parents should certify that after the marriage the dowry will be made. It is important to remember that it is not said that you should be endowed at first before you get married. They say you can go and get married, but only if a certificate proves that the bride and groom will come to celebrate their dowry. However, we have reversed everything. The groom's family finds it difficult to accept this excessive expenditure on the party's organization, the various gifts, and the envelope offered to the in-laws. They often wait for the right moment to take revenge. Faced with the increasing number of abuses against widows, Jessica Goma had the idea of creating a group to take action against gender-based violence. It is an association of women lawyers aiming to combat these injustices in the Congo through awareness and advocacy.
Women should not lose their rights. This means everything, and it challenges us because we often have the impression that when a woman buries her husband, she buries her rights with him, which is quite absurd in the 21st century. After all, there are still laws that exist and which, unfortunately, are not applied as they should be.
The right to property and inheritance are provided for in the Constitution. However, they still elude widows who are reluctant to claim them in court for fear of reprisals or ignorance. The situation of cohabiting women who have lost their spouse is more worrying. They cannot benefit from any legal protection to inherit from the deceased spouse, and this status quo is unfortunately well entrenched in Congolese culture. A woman who calls herself a widow must be officially married, and the state must recognize that for her rights to apply, she must be married. She's not a woman who has been married customarily. The Reflection and Action Group Against Gender-Based Violence accompanies many widows and women in court daily to assert their rights. In addition to legal support, these lawyers also aim to empower the widows economically.
We need to create a cooperative of widows so they can work together, encourage and help each other, and above all make money from their activity. It's a question of women empowerment, and we are really encouraging all women to think about being autonomous and to find ways of being self-sufficient.
Several experts believe that the dowry, once symbolic, is similar to the commodification of women and that it is an obstacle to legal marriage in Congolese society. Perhaps its symbolic value should be restored to avoid family tensions and give women their dignity back. The next challenge for the Reflection Group is to intensify its lobbying towards the government and members of parliament to shake up the prevailing inaction surrounding this complex societal issue.
What does the future hold for the fight against terrorism in the Sahel? And how can the continent unite to better defend its mining interests, which fuel conflicts and often lead, as we saw in our report, to the exploitation of children? It's time to meet again with our guest Modibo Makalou in Bamako. Let's hear what he has to say.
How would you analyze the strategy set up to combat terrorism? What works and what do you think has been a failure?
No, it's an overall failure. As I said, insecurity is not a phenomenon confined to one country. It's not one single country that can fight it. I have always said that sub-regional, regional and international cooperation is needed to combat insecurity and terrorism. Because these terrorist groups are offshoots of international groups. We don't really know about terrorism here. It doesn't originate here, even if now we have elements among us who are our brothers and our sisters. But all this comes from elsewhere. So the international community, if it wants to combat this phenomenon, really must commit itself as much as it does in Ukraine, as much as it tries to re-establish President Bazoum in Niger. You have seen the three-border zone. I don't like this term, but it's the Liptako-Gourma zone. I've lost count of the attacks that there have been. But we received very little help, very little assistance. And the national armies, well, you know, our borders are porous and the territories are vast. And these are very sparsely inhabited semi-arid areas. So you see, these groups are strutting around these areas with complete impunity. And while we know that there are sophisticated means of surveillance with drones, and you have the whole armada that is in the Sahel today, we cannot understand why this insecurity has spread. Because initially it was limited to a small part of Mali. Now more than 70% of Mali and almost all West Africa is being overwhelmed by terrorism. And so I think that countries need to join hands, that there is a genuine cooperation, sub-regional, regional, at the African but also international level, with those who have the appropriate means to help us. And I think we should start by strengthening our own means, because eventually, if you want to help someone, you should help them over the long term. You don't arrive and install armies that will end up being armies of occupation. Anyway, ultimately it won't produce any results. And I think this is the failure of the fight against terrorism now in Mali and the Sahel.
You've mentioned Mali's wealth, and Mali's mineral wealth fuels a lot of suspicion towards foreign powers who are interested in the country. What should the government do to develop true independence and increase the processing of raw materials?
What you just said is very important, and again, it's about international cooperation. You mentioned the mineral wealth of Mali. It's not Mali alone, it's the whole Sahel. And it's not just the Sahel, it's the whole of Africa. You know, we won't be able to achieve the energy transition we're talking about without Africa, without the bauxite from Guinea, without the gold from Mali, without the lithium from Zimbabwe, without the cobalt from the DRC, without the manganese from Gabon. I can reel off all the riches that lay underground, all the natural resources we have. But sadly, unfortunately, Africa is not taking advantage of its natural resources. Africa does not benefit from its natural resources because we negotiated some very one-sided contracts with multinationals which are backed up by powerful foreign governments. You have multinationals that are richer than most African countries. This is the case in the gold sector. The largest mining company in the world is worth more than $250 billion. And if you ask them to negotiate with Mali, they bring along an armada of lawyers, of specialists. And against them, our own technicians and experts stand little chance. The game is flawed from the start, and it's up to us to deal with that. This must change. It has to change. Africa must take their destiny into their own hands and manage their own resources. Sure, Africans must be accompanied by technical expertise, but also let's make sure there's transparency in negotiations. Good governance of extractive industries is essential because most of these extractive industries are non-renewable resources. And sub-regional cooperation is very important. Take Ghana. It's the largest gold producer in Africa. South Africa is the second, and Sudan is the third. Mali is the fourth. Burkina is the fifth, and Guinea is the sixth largest producer of gold. But can you imagine in West Africa if Burkina, Mali, and Guinea and Ghana joined forces? What would happen? We would be a world power because, you know, gold is the basis of currencies. And now it's the most sought-after resource, especially in these troubled times. Gold is a haven, and production costs are very low here. But unfortunately, we still don't refine our gold to deal with multinationals who export all the gold. I'm not blaming the multinationals, it's our own fault. So it's up to us to give ourselves the means to negotiate with these companies so that we refine gold, create added value here, create jobs here, and above all, so that gold can benefit all of our countries.
And that's it. Initiative Africa is over for today. You can find the interview of Modibo Makalou as well as our shows on our website africania.com. And of course, feel free to follow us on all our social media channels by liking, sharing and commenting with the hashtag Initiative Africa. And don't forget, next week, same time, same channel, I'll see you again for a new edition of Business Africa. Have a great week, and until next time, goodbye.